There's a big reason that the newest installment of Poppy Playtime was initially rated as the worst of all 4 games by its community. Although Poppy Playtime has had a good increase in quality and storytelling with each game, the 4th chapter managed to extremely fail the expectations of its fans with its countless bugs, rushed characters, and underwhelming boss fights. The Poppy Playtime community felt cheated by the creators not delivering on its promise and pushing out what felt like an extremely rushed and unfinished game. So, in this video, we'll be covering the tragic downfall of Poppy Playtime Chapter 4 and what exactly made it such a disappointment. How did Poppy Playtime go from pioneering the mascot horror game genre to being framed as nothing more than a cheap cash grab? Personally, being a creator who's looked through this game's lore for over a year now, I've been pretty invested in the Poppy Playtime story. So as a fan of the games myself, I want to try and pinpoint exactly what made this chapter so different from the others and why the fans felt so disappointed. To truly examine the huge change that this newest chapter brought onto the Poppy Playtime series, I'm going to be comparing it to its previous installments to highlight exactly what made the other games so much better than Chapter 4. But before that, we'll be going over the flaws in Poppy Playtime Chapter 4's story, its antagonists, and lore to see exactly what went so wrong in this game. So, to start off, let's go over the flaws in this game's story so that we can better understand the other 2 points on our list. The Chapter 4 story, although being around 5 hours worth of playtime, is pretty condensed. If you're unfamiliar with the Poppy Playtime story, the main things you gotta know is that we play as a past employee of the company creating these monsters, and in order to free the allies we found along the way of exploring this factory, we have to kill this mysterious villain named the Prototype, finding many disciples of the Prototype along the way and defeating them in each chapter, except for Mommy Longlegs. She wasn't really allied with the Prototype, but we killed her anyways. All this is to say, the main theme each chapter follows is by introducing a main villain and having us go through many different threats along the way of the story to eventually take that villain down. However, I'd say the story of Chapter 4 was not as easy to follow. In this chapter, we are in the prison location of the Playtime factory, because yes, a toy factory for some reason needs a prison. We eventually come face to face with our next main villain, the Doctor, an electronic hive mind who wants to test out our strength by putting us through many different challenges, and also a follower of the Prototype. He has us go through trials, fighting many critters, escaping his lion-like pet Yarnaby, and facing robot henchmen of his own creation. Along the way, we also meet a new ally, Doughy the Doughman, who in the midst of this abandoned and monster-filled factory managed to create a safe haven for those who wanted to live a life of peace unharmed by the Prototype. The only problem is that this safe haven can't last forever. With threats like Yarnaby, the Doctor, and the Prototype lurking around, it was only a matter of time before they'd find this place and destroy it. So we go around defeating both Yarnaby and the Doctor and have a very close encounter with the Prototype along the way. However, considering the Prototype was still a threat to the safe haven, we're advised to collect explosives so that we can explode a main part of the Prototype's power. But once we've collected all of the explosives, they are mysteriously stolen, and we hear an explosion in the distance. Little did we know that we had just gathered all of those explosives just for the Prototype to steal them from us and use it to blow up the very same place that we were trying to protect. In a fit of rage, the ally that had been helping us this entire way blamed us for the damage.
He killed my friend!
Alright, so let's kill him.
Oh my god, bro.
We eventually kill Doughy as well, and then we are revealed that the Prototype was actually Ollie, an ally who we thought had been helping us all this time, but instead was nothing more than an imposter. The Prototype then blows up the area we are standing on, and we fall into the location for the next chapter. Okay, that was a bit of a long story. I know I said it was condensed, but the length isn't really my issue with the story. No, my actual issue with this story is that compared to other chapters where we are working towards completing a task that we know will help us move on in the grand plot of all of these games, this newest story honestly feels like a filler episode. It feels like it's not going anywhere. Sure, we got to know Doughy and see his safe haven, but there wasn't any fulfillment anywhere in this game. I feel like this story was so rushed and put together so quickly because we never really get to go in depth into anything. This review on Reddit kind of explains it all. Might be a hot take, but I'm highly disappointed in Chapter 4 as a whole. I feel like the story was an absolute mess. With Chapter 2, it was doing all of these games to get pieces of the train code. With Chapter 3, it was going around the different buildings to restore power to Playcare and the gas production zone. But with this one, it's kinda just doing things. Like, I felt like I had no idea what I was doing half the time, or what my goal even was. By the time I finished, I was just pissed off and wanted the chapter to end. I just couldn't take any of it as seriously as I did in Chapter 3 or even Chapter 2. I really just feel like they could have cut out the entire chapter from the story and it would be fine. It feels like every chapter has been getting better and better, with Chapter 3 feeling like it was perfect in every way. Now I'm just disappointed. The story was essentially, we find the safe haven, immediately get kicked out to complete a random task, then return to safe haven, immediately leave to complete another task, and rinse and repeat. What was probably the coolest idea and location of this entire game series had so much potential for story and character building, but we never really actually get to build a connection to it without Doughy the Doughman or Poppy demanding us to leave. The concept of a safe haven, a secret civilization where the actual conscious and peaceful toys chose to live, is such an actual cool idea to explore, and could have been a really good storytelling device. But the most we got was a location and a few smiling critters giving us a voice line whenever we walked by, like they were some Oblivion NPC.
Farewell.
May you rest in peace.
But instead of having some funny animation or broken AI, they just stood there in their idle position looking at us. Actually, now that I mention it, there were supposed to be a multitude of different tasks that the player could complete in this area, but in a last-minute cut, they decided not to include it for some reason. I don't know, it might be because this game was rushed. I mean, considering Chapter 3 took 2 years to develop and is considered to be the best in the franchise, the fact that Chapter 4 took only a year to make, some corners were definitely cut. If we did end up having these little side quests that we could complete to interact with civilians of the safe haven, we would not only build stronger relations to the characters that would eventually die, but we would have a much deeper care for the fact that this place gets blown up. The fact that this story felt to me like a whole lot of running around and killing our oppositions, and not as much bonding with the area and character that's supposed to have a big plot twist at the end of the chapter, kind of disconnected me from the immersion of the game. It would have been so cool to actually do something in the safe haven, like have a side quest where we repair a broken part of the civilization, or save a toy, or even just help clear out a mess for the toys, which would all eventually then be ripped away from us. At least to me, what I think the purpose that this chapter was originally supposed to serve was giving us an actual personal reason to hate the prototype. Before it was scrapped, we were intended to help this safe haven thrive and become an actual place for these toys to live. But with the prototype blowing it up, that would be personal hate, an actual reason for us to seek out and kill the prototype in revenge. But if that were to be the purpose, the story failed tremendously. And it's not only the plot with the safe haven. Hot take, but I don't think that the final fight against Doughy was really necessary. In fact, I really didn't like it. I understand that the lore of the creators were trying to point out, being that Doughy has 3 children in him, and one of them has anger issues, so therefore seeing the safe haven destroyed, he lashes out on us, but it still feels like an unnecessary addition to the story. If not giving us the connection to Safe Haven to rip it away, they also had the perfect opportunity to have Doughy die here as well, giving us a death scene, possible theories towards him maybe still being alive, but most importantly, another reason to hate the prototype. The fact that Doughy lashes out on us at the end of this game kind of made me forget about the Safe Haven. Why should I care that that place burned down if its own leader is trying to rip me to shreds? It It just really didn't make any sense to me. I do think that the main point of this story was supposed to be giving us something that we can care for and befriend, just to have it destroyed by our mortal enemy. And while it did kind of deliver on some fronts, it really failed when it came to the overall delivery on Safe Haven and Doughy the Doughman. But how do the other chapters overcome chapter 4? How come these other 2 chapters, because now I'm not going to be counting chapter 1 as an actual game, it's more so of a tutorial. What do they do right that chapter 4 does wrong? Well, let's move on to the one thing that these games are known for most, the villains. The monsters of Poppy Playtime are by far the most hyped up part of every game. The big question everyone always has whenever a new chapter is being teased is what toy or character we will face next. So let me tell you why this chapter's roster of Nightmare Critters, Pianosaurus, Yarnaby, and the Doctor all ended up making a promise that was honestly completely missed in the end. Okay, let's start by addressing the history of these antagonists, because not every character in a game has to have major importance to the storyline. Chapter 2 showed this really well with Bunzo Bunny, the Mini Huggies, and PJ Pugapillar, which all really only serve their own game, but still deliver on their part, allowing us to collect pieces towards the final goal. However, the thing about these 3 villains is that they weren't hyped up to us in their own respective trailers like every single Chapter 4 villain was. Chapter 2 gave us multiple teasers towards Mommy Longlegs herself, who ended up clearly being the main villain. Same for Chapter 3. Every teaser led to the Smiling Critters and CatNap, which ended up being the main focus of that game. But now in Chapter 4, we had not only a full ARG, but fully fleshed trailers for each character in the chapter, and this got people hyped. Fans started to get super excited about this next chapter. Pianosaurus had a full-on ARG, and we were finally getting a dinosaur character on our roster, considering the last dinosaur character kind of failed our expectations. We also now had the Nightmare Critters, a whole new cast of characters to bring more to the critter group, Yarnaby, a lion-themed hunter toy that would hunt us down throughout the entire chapter, kind of like CatNap, and finally, the Doctor, the main villain of the entire story. Things were looking great. We've never seen so much hype over a chapter, so many trailers for each villain, and when this does come out, we're going to have so many fleshed out villains to battle on our journey. Right? Well, Yarnaby just ended up being one of those wall cubes from Mario that crushed you if you happen to miss time passing by it with the IQ of a squirrel. When we expected him to be hunting us down throughout the chapter like CatNap, he just didn't appear half the time he was supposed to.
Brandon, your game is bugged. Yarnaby is supposed to spawn. Well, not my problem. Thank you.
The Nightmare Critters had around a minute of total screen time and only served as an extra little obstacle to beating the Doctor. And then there's Pianosaurus. Oh my gosh. Don't even get me started on the fact that we had an entire puzzle that led to the reveal of this guy that had the most hype out of all 3 of the other side villains, and the one character that everyone was super excited to see had 10 seconds of a cutscene, and that is it. He looks at us, charges at us, and dies. There is no way they hyped this guy up this much just for him to die so early on. And this is a very similar case for every other villain of this game. Yarnaby's death just gets him caught on a hook and burns to death mid-chase scene, which was just unprecedented and nobody really understood why or what was going on. The Nightmare Critters only serve for 2 different scenes, and we only really get to face one of them in battle. And the Doctor, we never even got to see the guy. We had these robot henchmen randomly jumping at us to try and stop us, but the final fight scene that we were supposed to have ended up just being us running around while these robots literally just randomly turned on. And once we do finally get past these guys and apparently kill the Doctor by taking this chip out of the power system, it was confusing to say the least. We never outright see this guy die. He's the big bad, the main villain, and his death scene is just the audio of him screaming. I mean, they did add this cutscene 2 months after release, But still, comparing this to the other chapters, any character that was meant to be a side character was never hyped up in the first place, so we had no reason to be let down. And the main villains, those who were teased and actually had hype around them, actually filled in the role that they promised. They had actual interactions and character building for the player, and when it came to a final showdown, none of them failed to show up. But in the Doctor's case, his appearances in final battle were so confusing and anticlimactic. The traditional big boss battle that we got for chapters 2 and 3 were just put down to a science of follow the line to the battery, try not to run into the slowest robots on Earth, and rinse and repeat. I don't know, it honestly could just be me, but something about the Yarnaby chase sequences and the Doctor final battle felt like there was something missing from it. And both of these characters have the most abundant and out of nowhere death scenes. Like, tell me who was going to expect Yarnaby, a character meant to hunt us down no matter what, to die to a random hook on the ceiling and burned to death. Nobody did, because it was a genuinely out of nowhere death that we didn't even directly know that we did. Hey, time theory from the future. It's been 2 months since the initial game's release, and now Mob Entertainment is finally rolling out some cutscenes into characters' deaths and fixing some bugs that people have been really complaining about. But my point still stands. This game was released 2 months ago in probably the worst condition I've ever seen a mascot horror game get released in. There were bugs everywhere. Half the time the villains didn't appear, and we didn't have any cutscenes at all for these deaths. The fact that 2 months later we're getting these patches just shows that they really wanted to get this game out as fast as possible and didn't even bother playtesting or adding in some quality of life changes for their fans. Okay, back to the video. I think the overall problem with this chapter was the fact that it was done so quickly that you can tell that a lot of corners were cut to get it done in under a year of production. Compare this to Poppy Playtime Chapter 3, which was delayed multiple times to ensure its quality. It's regarded as the best chapter so far. In fact, I found this tweet asking the members of the community which chapter they enjoyed the most, and from around 100 replies, 90% of them said that Chapter 3 was much better than the 4th chapter. It's clear that the community was very disappointed with the game that they were given in response to all of this support and hype that they were throwing at the devs. And still, even though there's hundreds of bugs, the story is very clearly rushed, and it's pretty obvious that it was released way too early. Although it is a good game, it's nowhere near the horror and pure quality that Chapter 3 managed to offer. Even though Chapter 4 wasn't the best game of the franchise, I don't want to just end this video undermining the work of all of the devs and animators and voice actors who worked on this game. I just wish that there was a little bit more time spent on its development. I'd rather have a fully fleshed out and finished game in the span of 2 to 3 years than a half-done, somewhat rushed game in the span of 1. I think seeing how there were super cool features that would have done anything but harm the game being scrapped is just so sad, because they honestly could have been that missing piece for the story. And the fact that the villains of this chapter felt underwhelming to say the least didn't really do the fans justice for the game that they were so excited for. What a huge letdown to a beautiful franchise thus far. The amount of glitches and bugs brings the game to the same level of most oversaturated mascot horror games. Just cheesy. I'm left to assume they hired the same team of Garden of Banban for this one. Jokes aside, they removed a lot of the team from Chapter 3, considered the best chapter yet, and this follow-up shows. It's incredibly lacking, and every time the game becomes enjoyable, you're met with bugs. Don't waste your money on this game, because I'm not convinced the devs spent the proper time on this release. This is such a downgrade in almost every way possible. In terms of atmosphere, there's absolutely no tension or terror. The encounters are laughably bad and poorly designed. They don't do any of the antagonist justice. Mechanically, this feels like a fundamentally different game. and if Chapter 5 doesn't pick up the slack, I don't think it's worth continuing with this franchise. This chapter is unfinished. If you are trying to be immersed in a horror game experience, me having to reload 25 checkpoints to avoid glitches that cause the game to be unplayable is ridiculous. If I could refund, I would, to be honest, for this chapter. Being a longtime lore investigator for these games and watching and playing since the very beginning, I really hope that with Chapter 5, the devs take their time for it. But that's all for today. If you want to see more videos like this where I recap and debunk other games, let me know what other games you want to see me review in the comments. And while you're down there, I'm trying to hit 100,000 subscribers before summer, so if you could subscribe, that'd be really cool. Thanks for watching, and have a good day.